Hello world, welcome back. Okay, fair warning, this is a talking video. I'm not going to do anything interesting graphic wise or anything else like that. I will be doing funny voices. That's about it. So I'm talking about the LQA, and if you just want to read this instead of going through the whole talking video, I'm at jimkendall.net. So this is my lovely sewing room. Here in Japan, the big expectation is that all the apartments are tiny. They're so all closet. I lucked out, well, first of all, they're not all tiny. And I lucked out in that I was able to get a pretty good sized house that is, 2-story, detached, 2 bedrooms. And this is one of the bedrooms, which I made into my sewing room, which is amazing. And really quickly, my t-shirt, it says, "You don't get to be offended by science." And it is by Mama Dr. Jones. And I just feel this. I feel this in my bones. You don't get to be offended by science. Science just is. Science is our understanding of the world. And gravity is gravity. And if you're offended by gravity, I'm sorry for you, but no. So I love this t-shirt. I'm just going to read my blog post, and I'm going to do it kind of quickly, and like I said, with funny voices. So jimkendall.net. To start, what is LQA? LQA is an incentive offered to federal employees who are hired from the U.S. to leave and come to a foreign area to work for the military. It is meant to cover the cost of housing, utilities, and sometimes additional items, like if you have to pay for a parking spot at your home. The LQA is different from what active duty gets, basic housing allowance or BHA, because active duty has an entitlement to housing from the military. The entitlement is either provided housing on base that meets a certain standard by rank and family size, or the equivalent cash to pay for housing off base. See? Funny voices. BHA is a set amount each month. LQA is a fluid amount that is determined on a case-by-case basis. The rules around how the LQA is set up is so that it only pays for housing and nothing else. For example, let's say I initially set up my LQA agreement with HR and to say I am single and living alone, but then I decide I want a roommate. I am required to let HR know of my changed status so that they can reduce the LQA based upon the presumption that the roommate will now pay half of the housing costs. The key to understanding the difference between BHA and LQA is that the former is an entitlement and the latter is an incentive. How much will my LQA be? Since the LQA is determined on a case-by-case basis, this question can only be answered in broad strokes until you sit down with your HR. First, you figure out what your housing group is, and that is this chart. Here we go. Yeah, I have this on my blog. Next, so the housing chart. There we go. Next, you find the LQA max amount for your country, area, housing group, and if you are with or without family. Note, this amount fluctuates every 2 weeks and is set by the State Department, and then I provide the web address. The max amount is an annual amount, so all you have to do is divide it by 12 months, and that's how much you can spend on rent, right? No. Nothing is that simple when dealing with money from the federal government. All right, changing up the voice now. I'm kind of tired of that one, and you probably are too. In Japan, it is standard to have to pay move-in fees. These are paid by you up front and then reimbursed back to you through your LQA and has to be figured into the worksheet. What worksheet, you ask? I got this really good Excel worksheet from my HR once I talked to someone who could give me a detailed answer. The worksheet is basically the max amount of the LQA converted to yen, or currency of the country you're in. Then input the monthly rent and the fees. Multiply the monthly rent by 12 to get an annual amount and subtract that from the max amount. Also subtract out the fees. And what is left is what you have to spend on utilities. Okay. Side note, this is only for year one. At the 12-month mark of receiving LQA, you're going to do an audit, and these fees will have been paid back to you, and they will be taken out of this equation. More on that in a bit. And until you get an approved LQA amount from HR, this is only an estimate. So you look at properties through the base housing office with realtors from out in town, and you get a description sheet of the property with all of these amounts. You can plug them into the worksheet that you made. Make sure to adjust the max LQA and the exchange rate as they change in real life. Housing office versus human resources. The housing office on base is not going to be super helpful with LQA questions because they don't deal with it. They handle BHA only. So make sure to go to human resources. And if you have a situation like mine where you have someone just showing you the housing group charts and the office allowance website, find someone else to talk to who can give you a better, more detailed answer. Does my LQA change every 2 weeks? A common misconception among the GS employees who receive LQA that I have talked to is that their LQA fluctuates each paycheck. I asked my HR about that, and the answer is no, it does not fluctuate. When you sign the LQA agreement with HR, that locks in what your max amount is going to be. And there is a statement that says LQA is computed, I feel like I'm saying that wrong, and paid bi-weekly by the DFAST system based on the exchange rate for that pay period. Calculation method is as listed. Annual LQA rent and utilities, divide that by the number of days in the year, times 14 days, which is your pay period, to obtain bi-weekly amounts. So another way to put it is that the agreement is to get you a certain amount of yen, or currency of your country, to pay your housing costs. But the US government doesn't pay in anything other than US dollar, so the US dollar amount in your paycheck is the yen equivalent, based upon the DFAST exchange rate for that pay period. As the exchange rate fluctuates, so does the dollar amount that you're paid. Utilities. At the time you initially sign the LQA agreement with HR, you have to estimate the cost of heat, electric, kerosene, etc. At the annual audit, you bring all those receipts, and if you were overpaid LQA, then you have to pay back that difference. Wait, what? Yeah. Welcome to dealing with the US government. LQA is an incentive that is designed to pay for exactly what it costs to house you and nothing more. At the annual audit, your utilities for the rest of the time that you receive LQA is then set to that actual amount. If you're receiving LQA for 3, 5, 10, or in some cases 20 years, the utilities from the first year is the fixed amount of what you get for all those other years. Now, this is the part where I say the thing out loud. The way you can make money off of the LQA is to artificially inflate your utilities bill. And I mean make those suckers as expensive as possible. AC on all day, night, same for the heat in the winter. Open the windows and keep those puppies on. Make those bills skyrocket high as you can. Then you do that audit with those super high bills. And from year 2 onward, be frugal in your use of utilities, and you can then pocket the difference. I first heard of this grift by a white male GS employee who advised me to do this. He acted like it was the most normal thing in the world to do, that it was completely legit, and of course you should try and make money off of the LQA. To quote him, he said, "Why aren't you running up your utilities bills?" The difference between him and everyone else who isn't a white male is that when I get caught, I get punished. White men don't have much sense of accountability. In my personal experience, and from what I've seen in the world in general, white men don't have much sense of accountability because in a system made by white men for white men, the government employee system included, they get a slap on the wrist while the rest of us actually face consequences. To be clear, I do not participate in this fraud. I do not recommend anyone else should participate in this fraud. And if you have someone advising you to participate in this fraud because everyone does it, Do not take their advice, especially if it's a white male acting like no consequence will ever come from doing this thing. And for everybody out there who's going to be like, what I'm saying about white men being treated differently from everybody else, and they're going to point out that there's all kinds of times where white men are held accountable. I'm just going to be like, once out of 100 times does not mean it is a consistent thing for white men to be held accountable. It is simply a basic truth about the American system that women and anybody who's not white gets held to a much different standard. And it's expressed in this system here where white men just feel entitled to participate in this fraud like there's no consequences for it, because the reality is, for them, there isn't. All right. Consequences for fraud and misuse. If you get caught and held accountable for doing the utilities grift or any other attempt to make money off the LQA, the consequences could be you lose your LQA. You have to pay back what the investigation determines you intentionally and unlawfully defrauded the government out of. You can lose your job and you can lose your travel agreement. Can you get LQA if you are hired in country of service? Generally, no. The person receiving LQA has to be in the United States or specifically in a non-foreign area in order to qualify for LQA. This is because this is an incentive to entice folks to make the trip to leave the US and go to a foreign area. The instruction regarding LQA that applies to my situation is that once I reach the max amount of time that I am allowed to be overseas working, then I have to go back to a non-foreign area for a minimum of 2 years. After the 2-year cooling off period, I can then reapply for another GS position for the DoD in a foreign area. So if you're already in country, you don't need the incentive to come to this country because you're already here. Not all LQA recipients have the exact same rules. Keep in mind that there are many different types of civilian employees when working overseas, and each has a different rule book. A non-appropriated fund employee has different rules from an appropriated fund employee, and a U.S. Navy employee like myself has a different rule book than a Department of Education employee teaching at the on-base schools. You can get the details from your HR rep. Hope that info was helpful. Good luck if you're also looking to become a U.S. government employee. If there are any questions you guys have, feel free to comment and I will do my best to answer or maybe make another post, such as one person asked about getting one of these jobs. So my next project will be how to search on USA jobs. Cheers! So all of that is at my blog. I have all kinds of posts on my blog about my life. It goes back several years. I've been doing it for a while. So sorry for the really long talking video. I just didn't want to leave out anybody who is subscribed to me on YouTube. And when I post this on my blog, you guys don't know to go over there to check it. So there you go. All right. Peace and love. Bye, y'all.